Welcome to Things You Don't Know. The phrase brainworm is the kind of headline that overrides people's judgment. It sounds like a diagnosis, a verdict, and a punchline all at the same time.
And once a story like this hits the bloodstream, it does not stay medical. It becomes political, moral, and very personal.
Today, we do the slow version. What was reported about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., what conditions like this actually are, and then a historical warning from apartheid South Africa about how madness can be useful, sometimes to the state and sometimes to the accused. Here are our ground rules. We'll stick to what's been reported and what credible medical and historical sources say. We're not doing armchair medicine and we're not converting a headline into a theory of someone's character.
So, Chandler, what was reported about RFK Jr.?
Well, he described in a 2012 deposition that memory loss slash brain fog and a dark spot on brain scans that some doctors thought was a tumor. Another doctor suggested that it could be a dead parasite. Think about that, a dead parasite in his brain. The public reaction split into two impulses, ridicule and fear.
Yeah, the core report in May of 2024 came from a deposition described in news coverage. Kennedy said a worm got into his brain, ate part of it, then died, alongside claims that he experienced cognitive impairment at the time. His campaign, when he was running for president, said he recovered and emphasized his health. We actually don't know how RFK got the brainworm because his campaign did not provide medical records. And the public story mainly comes from his 2012 deposition, which Chandler mentioned here, plus later reporting. Now, RFK was deposed in a 2012 divorce proceeding where he disclosed details about his personal health issues. During the deposition, he mentioned experiencing memory loss and cognitive problems around 2010. He testified that a doctor at New York Presbyterian Hospital told him an abnormality on his brain scans was caused by a worm that, as he said, got into my brain and ate a portion of it and then died. He also stated he was diagnosed with mercury poisoning around the same time. All of that is very interesting, and all of that tends to indicate long term issues. Now, the purpose of the deposition was related to legal discussions during his divorce from Mary Richardson Kennedy, specifically concerning his health and its potential impact on his earning capacity. The details of this private deposition became publicly known in May of 2024 when they were reported by the New York Times. Now, what does this mean? Well, the court at that time gave him a great consideration to the lack of his earning capacity. And yeah, it became a standardized issue for him. Now, what we can do with this is lay out the most plausible medical explanation and the exposure routes that fit with the best available data.
To move from a hypothesis to a solid answer, you would need details that have not been made public. An imaging report, is there a single calcified lesion versus multiple cysts? The location in the brain, the appearance over time. A serology report for T solium can be negative in some single lesion calcified cases, but still helpful. What is the exposure timeline? Where did he travel and live? Did he eat high risk meals? And whether he had close contact with someone from an endemic area who might have been an asymptomatic carrier. Any evidence of an intestinal tapeworm around that time, that would come from stool testing, which is rarely done unless something is suspected.
And the fear version is important to name because it keeps coming up. Could something like this affect intellect or judgment? It's a reasonable human question, but the responsible answer is, well, you don't get to a confident conclusion from just one vivid phrase.
Exactly. If you care about fitness, the responsible path is documentation, clinical explanation, and present day evidence rather than a kind of meme trial. From what I'm seeing here, my feeling is that most of these things have long term consequences. Even though it sounds rather exotic, neuropsychosis is a recognized US problem. It is estimated that there are 1,320 to 5,050 new US cases every year. And that's kind of a wide range because surveillance is pretty imperfect with this. People tend to hide that because they realize that it says something about your fitness and abilities, which, of course, RFK used in his divorce trial to reduce his settlement. Now, the CDC, in their notes about emerging infectious diseases analysis, which covered from 2003 to 2012, said that there were around 18,500 hospitalizations over 10 years and 908 million in hospital charges for similar diagnoses.
Now, let's talk about neurocystic sarcosis for a little bit. Multiple experts interviewed in major coverage said that the most likely culprit, if it was real, would be neurocystic sarcosis, caused by the larval stage of the pork tapeworm Taenia solium. Important nuance. These cysts do not eat brain tissue in the way that the phrase brain eating worm suggests. These symptoms usually come from a cyst presence in the immune/inflammatory response, especially as it degenerates/calcifies.
Now, one of the things that's interesting to me is I wonder how many people understand what a cyst is. And we did talk about this a little bit. Could you perhaps elucidate that a bit for us, Chandler? What is a cyst?
Yes, a cyst, it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Weaver, it is an inflammatory pocket that forms in an area on your body that has pus and all kinds of nasty stuff that forms in it.
So you're saying it is a sac, it is a contained thing, right? A
Yes.
sac. Yes. And so, there's a lot of different hypotheses, but let's explore perhaps the most plausible one, which is that you swallow a T. solium egg via fecal contamination, food, water, poor hand hygiene, or by a carrier.
This is a classic route for cysticercosis and neurocysticercosis. You get cysticercosis after swallowing tapeworm eggs that were shed in the stool of a human tapeworm carrier, as we said, often via contaminated food, water, or an unhygienic food handler. This fits both travel exposure and possible exposure anywhere with an infected carrier.
You know, what data supports this kind of pathway? Tapeworms usually don't go to the brain per se. That's an intestinal and other areas of the body that the tapeworms go to, because the blood-brain barrier is pretty significant, keeps it from that. So my own personal opinion, I don't support this pathway. The CDC explicitly emphasizes that cysticercosis happens when people consume eggs, and eggs come from a person with a tapeworm. The second hypothesis is exposure from a tapeworm carrier in a household or close contact setting. Even without travel, U.S. cases happen through contact with a carrier. Reviews of U.S. cysticercosis note that documented local transmission, particularly when a tapeworm carrier is present in the household close contacts. Third hypothesis is, first, you got an intestinal tapeworm from undercooked pork, or then eggs spread in the self or through others through fecal contamination. Now, people often say you get it from undercooked pork, but the CDC's key point is what, Dr. Deneen?
Cysticercosis does not spread from eating raw or undercooked pork. That route is for an intestinal tapeworm infection, Teichonesis. However, if someone has an intestinal tapeworm, eggs can then be spread via stool contamination to others, or more rarely, back to the same person. So undercooked pork is more of an indirect stepping stone to Teichonesis, eggs, and environment than a direct cause of brain cysts. Now, the term brain worm is medically sloppy language. In many cases, experts have discussed what's involved, as we said before, isn't a worm chewing brain tissue. It's larval cysts from parasite caused by the larvae of the pork tapeworm.
The CDC's description is fairly straightforward. Cysticercosis happens after someone swallows tapeworm eggs. Larvae can then travel to tissues, muscle, eye, and brain. Now, that is not the tapeworm itself, but the residuals, eggs, and other bacteria from it. And they form cysts. When the cysts are in the brain or nervous system, that's called neurocysticercosis. Now, what that means is, no, there's not a worm eating the brain tissue after the sac is formed, but previous to that, there could be consumption. When that sac is formed, it then balloons out. It's like somebody putting a little balloon in your brain and blowing it up a little bit. And that causes death of the tissues surrounding that area, meaning that that part of the brain is still dead, whether it's eaten or not.
And this also corrects a common public misunderstanding. It's not simply, oh, I just ate pork once. The root is typically ingesting eggs, often connected to sanitation and hygiene failures, meaning it's preventable and also socially patterned.
It's important to remember that symptoms vary. The CDC materials and public health literature often emphasize seizures and other neurological complications. The severity depends on the number and location of the cysts and the inflammatory response, including what happens when the cysts degenerate.
So, to answer the public worry very carefully, yes, brain involvement can cause symptoms very clearly. But the leap from there to there was something on a scan to sweeping judgments about intellect is not really that scientifically disciplined. And that brings us to your parallel of Dimitri Tsatsandas.
Yes, this is one of the most controversial cases in Southern African history. Dimitri Tsatsandas assassinated the founder of South African apartheid, Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd, in September 1966. In the aftermath, Sefendus was found unfit to stand trial on the grounds of schizophrenia. This became foundational to how this assassination was publicly explained.
And the tapeworm detail becomes part of that public story.
Right. The story that circulated for decades, including the claim that Sefendus believed the tapeworm inside his brain was talking to him and controlled his actions. This was reinforcing a portrait of him as an apolitical, psychotic lunatic rather than a political actor.
So why would both the apartheid state and then Sefendus himself have reasons to accept or even encourage that framing?
Let's start with the state. If you can frame this assassination as the act of a madman, you reduce the risk of martyrdom and you drain the act of political meaning. You turn a political wound into a medical anecdote. Writers reflecting on Sefendus have argued that the madness story functioned to protect the white supremacist regime from confronting motive and symbolism under apartheid.
It's a form of narrative containment.
Now, the second half, why would Sefendus allow himself to be portrayed as insane? Here we have to be careful and source aware. In the classic study of the Woodward killing, The Man Who Killed Apartheid, Harris Docimetis and Jerry Longan argue that Sefendus was not simply the tapeworm obsessed lunatic of the official story, and that the public record was shaped by distortion.
And Dosimetris and others also suggest something else, that presenting an insane plea could be strategically life preserving. In other words, if he wasn't insane, then they would probably have put him to death.
Yes, as a mixed race person in a white dominated society, many accounts explicitly argue Sefendus used the tapeworm story and a cultivated image of madness to avoid execution because a politically motivated non-white assassin of Verwoerd faced an obvious risk of a firing squad in that system.
So basically, the regime benefits because it erases politics, and the accused can benefit because, well, it keeps him alive.
That's the tension. This man was locked away for 30 years with no treatment at all. And the Semitist book is central to the modern debate because it insists that we revisit the official story and take political motives seriously.
Importantly, this isn't just a literary argument. Even recent scholarly discussion revisits the inquiry and the ethics of forensic assessment in the Sefendus case.
What exactly does this historical detour teach us about RFK Jr.? The lesson is about the mechanism. Once a parasite narrative enters the public sphere, it becomes a tool. It can be used to delegitimize someone obviously unfit or to depoliticize a story. Nothing matters. It's just pathology.
Interestingly enough, if you listen to what you just said there, Chandler, it delegitimizes someone to take responsibility for their actions. Ergo, are they truly fit for public office? Question mark. Either way, the worm becomes a substitute for evidence, for sure.
That's why we keep returning to the same old-fashioned standard: restraint, evidence, clarity about what we do and don't know. If you care about public leadership, health transparency and someone's fitness can certainly be a legitimate topic, but a grotesque headline cannot be the whole argument.
The humane point here is also the discipline point. Don't turn disgust into certainty.
Absolutely correct. We need more information. We need more public disclosure. And for a public person in public office, we should have it. Anyhow, I hope you were interested in this. This was Things You Don't Know.
If you take one thing with you from this discussion, parasites belong in medicine, friends. Madness narratives belong under skepticism, especially when power of any kind has something to gain. So long, everybody.
So long, everybody, and don't forget to stay curious. Bye for now.